know what it is. If you're looking for the best soilless potting mix recipe for your indoor plants, here's how to make your own and help your plant babies thrive.
Y'all know what it is.
What's up, y'all? It's your girl Maisha, and today I'm going to be showing you how I create my own soilless eco-friendly potting mix, what plants are currently thriving in it, the pros and cons of switching to soilless, and why you need to ditch peat unless you like being toxic to the environment like these crusty and dusty Republicans who's trying to take away women's reproductive rights. The growing medium that I use is called Coco Coir. It is highly absorbent. It does retain moisture. However, it dries out quickly enough to where your roots do not rot in it. It comes as a brick, but you put water on it and breaks it down into this dirt-like consistency. It's not as dirty or not as corrupt as CPS system targeting black and brown babies and putting them in foster care system at a disproportionate rate. Okay? It has a neutral pH, so you do have to add some type of nutrients into the Coco Coir so that your plants can thrive in it. Otherwise, they will not live in this just alone. The great thing about Coco Coir is that it is better for the environment. Y'all might have heard of something called peat moss, which is pretty much like Coco Coir in the sense that you can grow in it. However, they're totally different. Peat moss is at the bottom of peat bogs. It is the soil or the dirt that is at the bottom of peat bogs, and when harvested, it releases CO2 into the air. And if you didn't know this, peatlands store about 33% of the world's carbon, which is way more than all of the forests put together. So releasing that carbon into the air is a direct contributor to climate change, which is why we should leave peat bogs alone. Your plants simply do not need it. I will link some resources in the description box below so that you can learn more about peat moss if it is important to you. Note that every product that I use will be linked in my Amazon shop in the description box below or in my channel banner where you can follow the direct link. Due to its neutral pH, you do have to add aeration and nutrients to the mix so that the roots can stay healthy, just like black babies are healthier when they're around their nurturing mothers and fathers. So speaking of nutrients, I'm going to introduce you to two of them that I use in my mix. The first one is going to be chicken manure compost. This chicken manure comes from O&E, which is also linked in my Amazon shop. It is 100% organic and odorless, which I can really attest to. This one does not burn the plant so that you can use however much you want to. However, I don't like to use fertilizers or anything that could burn my plant babies. I will say that if you do use too much of it, you may run into the issue of having too much compaction around the root, so therefore you want to make sure that if you use a lot of this plus the Coco Coir, you want to aerate as much as possible, which we're going to get into what aeration means later. I've noticed that once I added this to my mix, it does bring fungus gnats, so that's the only thing that you might want to worry about. But I do treat it with mosquito biz tea, and if you are not from my TikTok or from my Instagram, you may not be familiar with the methods that I use for pest control, so definitely comment down below if you want me to do a separate video on how I control the pests in my plants. And some of my plants that are truly thriving is my Monstera deliciosa that has already grew a new finish-rated leaf and it's growing out its moss pole currently. My fiddle leaf fig, which I just repotted, has grown about 2 or 3 more leaves while in this mix. I even added it to my ponytail palm, which is actually a succulent. And if y'all want me to do a video about succulents and the proper mix for succulents, definitely let me know in the comments below. I'll highly recommend compost. But if you're loving this video so far and you're finding it very helpful, definitely subscribe to my channel and hit that like button for me. The other nutrient that I use is called worm castings, also known as worm poop, pretty much like chicken manure. It does not burn your plant, so you can use as much as you can. It is very organic, very renewable, and very eco-friendly. That's why I love it so much. Before I started to even use or even add compost, I was only using worm castings. My plants like my bird of paradise, my Dieffenbachia, my alocasia poly, as well as my elephant ears, all thrived in just worm castings in my mix. Another thing that I love about worm castings is that it has an enzyme in it that repels other pests like leaf-eating bugs that love to suck on or eat the plant's juices, like aphids, spider mites, whiteflies, those different type of pests. Both worm castings and organic compost is slow release fertilizers that can be used throughout the year, pretty much like black and brown babies are legally kidnapped throughout the year. And not because black parents are unfit, but because the foster care system and the government does not know how to empathize or care about black families being torn apart. Another ingredient that I use is called New Zealand Sphagnum Moss, which a lot of people get confused with peat moss. They do grow from the same plant, however, they are very, very different. Sphagnum moss is a plant that grows on top of the bogs, but the harvesting of it is very renewable and it does not harm anything. It does not really CO2 into the air or harm anything like peat moss does. Most sphagnum moss comes in a brick like this. Once you put water on it and soak it, it's then broken down into what you see right here. And what I love about sphagnum moss is that it is highly absorbent as well, and it dries out quickly enough. So I pretty much use sphagnum moss as a moisture retention type of, medium, so that it can keep, the plants that love moisture very moist. Okay, and last but not least, for the thing that really matters the most when it comes to mixing your mixture together, it's going to be your aeration. So you can either use something called Perlite, which I have stopped using because I find that I like the one I'm going to be talking about a little bit more. So the other type of aeration that I use is called Pumice. Pumice is a very rocky substance. It's an inorganic matter. I think it's also made from volcano glass. And one thing that I love about Pumice over Perlite is that it does not float to the top of the mix when you water it. So pumice definitely sits in the mix and it makes it more chunky. Plants like your arrowroot, your succulents, all of those, they love like a chunky, very aerated mix, and that's why I love pumice. Another one that I use is called Coarse Sand. Coarse Sand is also like a rocky texture. It's more so like fine rock. It is more compact because that's what sand is, obviously. And this goes into more so like your succulents, those plants that love to dry out completely in between watering, that does not like to be compacted around the soil. Another two that I like to use, these are organic substances, however, they work just as well in, wicking water away from the roots and also, just keeping it very chunky. The first one is called Orchid Bark. You probably have, if you do follow me on TikTok, you probably hear me say Orchid Bark a lot. I do love the Orchid Bark. It definitely absorbs the water. Another one that I use in like my fiddle leaf figs, my tree-like plants, is going to be your fine pine bark. And it also is another point of aeration for your plants too. These are the main ones that I definitely use for aeration. And one more thing that I forgot to tell you about is called horticultural charcoal. Horticultural charcoal, not to be confused with your charcoal that you put on the grill or your charcoal that you put in the fireplace or anything like that. This is also a soil or mix amender where it helps to purify your mix from any toxins. It also helps absorb the water too within the mix as well, so you don't have to worry about that. And it just comes as just like very chunky pieces. It eliminates stagnant water in pots and odor as well. So that's another great benefit of horticultural charcoal. And these are also great to use in like, terrariums or anything like that that has a stagnant water that's in there for a long time. The mix that we're going to create is going to be an everyday potting mix. We're going to first use the cocoa coir. So I like to use my cocoa coir in cups. So I'm going to put about 10 cups in here. I'm going to mix in the compost, or organic chicken manure compost. So for every 3 cups of cocoa coir, I put 1 cup of chicken manure. Then we're going to add our aeration, which is going to be my pumice. Since we have so much worm castings and cocoa coir and all of that in there, which is definitely going to be compaction around the roots, we're going to put a lot more pumice in there. It's about 10 cups of pumice. We're going to do some pine bark fine. Now for you could do either or. You can do pine bark or orchid bark. It's pretty much up to you. Then we're going to do some orchid bark. 5 cups of orchid bark. To make it really, trying to add about 3 cups of our horticultural charcoal. Last but not least, we're going to add in our hydrated sphagnum moss. I usually just take a handful of sphagnum moss in there. You want to make sure that you mix it really, really well. One thing that I like to make sure of is that it is well draining. It is as well draining as I thought I made it to be. So what I do is I take about a scoop of it and I pour it into just a nursery pot that has a lot of holes like this. And then what I do is I just water it to see if it drains quickly. See how quickly it drains? That tells me that it's well draining and that my plant's roots will not be compacted by this. So the different plant babies that I'm going to be repotting today is going to be my Monstera deliciosa that experienced root rot before, but I was able to shake it back by propagating it. And then my Monstera and Raphidophora tetrasperma mixture, which also experienced root rot, but I was able to shake it back and now it's growing like crazy. If you're not familiar with how I repot the plants, then definitely go and watch my TikTok videos for plant repotting for beginners. So what you want to do when it's kind of compact like that is just kind of start to move the soil around. They're really in there, really tight in there. So I want to make sure I don't lose or hurt any roots. I'm going to use a butter knife to ensure that it comes out of here without disturbing any of the roots. This is the little root ball. As you can see, definitely compacted around the roots. It is definitely ready to be repotted. Those roots have grown in tremendously in there. Not straight down into the root. Like, don't stab it like this is Friday the 13th and you going Jason crazy or something, honey, okay? Or Michael Myers. You just kind of want to tease her out a little bit, okay?
Please, don't tease her. Never leave her.
Okay? Same.
Dang. Girl, look at that. Look at that. Look at that. I made this with some acrylics.
I made that with some acrylics. Don't play with my interior. Don't play with my interior design skills.
That's what we like to see, okay? We're gonna add my hair is in it. Ugh. I'm gonna add a little bit of mix to the pot and the moss pole. Kind of like just situated in there. Kind of like secured in the pot. Push it down in there. Make sure all the roots are in there. So as y'all can see, I just lost the sun and this plant is still draining. Like, it's draining to see black and brown mothers constantly beg CPS, constantly beg the foster care system to release their babies, to allow their babies to come home, to free their babies. If you want to learn more about the crisis that is happening with CPS stealing black and brown babies at a disproportionate rate, then definitely look in my description box below for some links and some resources. And also, if you want to become a part of the movement or speak out about it or make yourself heard, then definitely join Operation Stop CPS on Instagram and on their website to see how you can become more involved. Definitely make sure that if you do create your Soilless mix like I just did, that your Soilless mix is specific to whatever plant that you're going to be, creating it for. It's like your Monsteras, your aeroids, they're pretty much not picky. They just want a very well draining mix. This was an all-purpose mix. Let me know if y'all want me to make another mix for succulents or any other plant. And if you're one of those people who watch this video and say, you know what, love what she did, great, it's great to see her plants thriving, however, I'm just not that kind of person who wants to mix up my mix, then don't worry, I have a Soilless mix that is coming out very soon. I'm going to be releasing this. Right now it is in test phase, but it's going to come in a compostable bag that's just like this, and I'm going to be selling it. So make sure in the description box below you click on the link to join my email list so that you could be the first to be notified when this Soilless mix drops. And while you're here, since you made it here this far, you might as well go ahead and watch my other video that I did on my greenhouse cabinet or any of my other planting videos that's here on the channel.